Well, good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this policy exchange event, Delivering the Rehabilitation Revolution. My name is Mark Easton. I'm the BBC's home editor, and I'm going to be chairing today's events. Revolutions must, almost by definition, have a turning point. For the French, it's said to have been the fall of the Bastille, a state-run prison, of course, with a less than impressive record for rehabilitation. Perhaps future generations will look to this conference as a key moment in the rehabilitation revolution. March the 4th will be the July the 14th for English justice and Welsh justice as well, of course. Thank you to Deloitte for hosting this event, and to the sponsors for today, Ingeus, Sodexo Justice Services and NACRO. We are at a turning point, I think. A big and bold plan is on the table. The time for trial and test has passed. The time, more quickly actually than many had expected, the time for delivery is almost upon us, but many questions remain, questions which will undoubtedly be asked and possibly answered throughout today. And we have an absolutely first-class lineup to consider the challenges of using payment by results and the profit motive as key drivers in improving outcomes in the criminal justice system. Of course, the profit motive and payment by results are not new concepts in the delivery of justice. Indeed, it's often said that the entrepreneurial spirit is a distinct feature of the Anglo-Saxon justice system, inspiring creative solutions to deal with criminal behavior and its consequences as efficiently as possible. In the 17th century, merchant seafarers made fortunes transporting convicts to North America. The more felons they shipped to the New World, the more profit that they made. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is a straightforward example of payment by results. Then there was Jeremy Bentham, who was very disappointed, you may be surprised to learn, that when the government agreed to adopt his famous panopticon design for prisons, they then refused to let him run them. The great utilitarian had hoped, and his letters prove this, to make his fortune locking up the unhappiest of his fellow citizens. Perhaps the liberal Bentham might have fitted very well into the current coalition government, what with David Cameron's agenda for well-being and, of course, the Lord Chancellor's enthusiasm for private sector involvement in the justice system. In a moment, we will hear from a panel of very distinguished experts to discuss some of the building blocks of using PBR in offender management. But before that, I'm delighted to welcome the Minister for Prisons and Rehabilitation to set the scene for us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Wright, MP.
Well, thank you, Mark. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm delighted that Policy Exchange, who've made such a significant contribution to the debate around the rehabilitation revolution, have decided to host this conference. And I want to say a few words to you and then, of course, answer some questions before we move into the panel discussion. Let me say first, you won't have failed to notice that it's been a very busy time recently for the Ministry of Justice. From reforming community sentences to announcements on prison capacity, to plans for reforming youth custody that focus on education and training, to the appointment of the Victims Commissioner. And most recently, Damien Green set out the case for cross-system accountability and leadership, exploiting technology and improving transparency in order to tackle delays. Now, there's much that is good about our criminal justice system. It is fiercely independent, undoubtedly fair, and thousands of dedicated professionals do difficult work with challenging individuals. But the reasons we are pushing forward at pace is because we believe that the justice system remains in need of reform if it's to deliver effective punishment for offenders, meaningful support for victims, and a sustained reduction in reoffending. The government has made significant progress down that road, but there is still some way to go. And because the benefits of achieving that reform in societal, financial and individual terms, and especially, of course, for current and future victims of crime, are significant, we need to get on with it. We cannot keep doing the same things and expecting different results. And that's why our number one priority as a ministerial team is the transformation of the way in which offenders are managed in the community. We need an approach that both punishes people properly and supports them to get their lives back on track so they don't offend again in the future. And the reason we're doing this is simple. Reoffending rates are too high and have been too high for too long. And that's despite significant increases in government spending on offender management over the past decade. And the cost to society is huge, not least in financial terms. Prisoners and those who reoffend cost the economy between $9.5 billion and $13 billion if you look at 2007-8. Now that's not to say that good things are not being done with difficult offenders at the moment. The service that probation provides is a crucial part of the criminal justice system, and I have great respect for the work that probation officers and other staff do with some of society's most challenging and chaotic individuals. And I know that there have been improvements made, including a reduction in crimes committed by those subject to community orders, and some excellent work on integrated offender management and other partnerships, successfully targeting prolific and priority offenders. However, overall rates have barely changed in recent years, and this cannot go on. Nothing shows this more strongly than the fact in the year ending March 2011, nearly half of prisoners were reconvicted within a year of release, and that rate is even higher for short-sentence prisoners who currently receive no statutory support, with over 17,000 reoffenders committing nearly 83,000 further offences in a year. That's thousands and thousands more victims, and that's why we have a duty to make changes. This is not an argument that denigrates the work probation are doing at the moment. Instead, it's as strong an argument as it's possible to make for extending support to this cohort. Almost £1 billion is spent on delivering sentences in the community, and we believe it can be spent better and on more offenders. We know that offenders are one of the most challenging groups in society, and that's why we must bring the resources and expertise of the private, voluntary and public sectors to bear on this challenge. So our vision is for a refocused and streamlined public sector service, tasked with keeping the public safe from the most dangerous and high-risk offenders, with private and voluntary sector organisations working together to close the revolving door of the criminal justice system by tackling lower-risk offenders. For the first time, all offenders, including those serving less than 12 months, would be subject to mandatory supervision and tailored rehabilitation on release from prison. That means extending support to an additional 46,000 offenders who leave prison each year. And we've called for a greater use of mentors who will reach into prison and provide through-the-gate support to prepare offenders for release, supporting them in all aspects of their life from day one in the community, including help in finding work and accommodation, tackling drug and alcohol addictions, and addressing literacy and educational problems. I'll say a bit more about one of the key aspects of that, the payment by results approach, and those who we want to see competing for this work. And I know that the Secretary of State wants to talk with you later about the importance of linking up what happens in prison and in the community, and about the role employment and training can play in rehabilitation. But before I do that, I want to reiterate our firm commitment to reform. The consultation period has just finished, and we will of course take into account the views expressed during it. Indeed, you'll appreciate that's why I can't go into detail about the final design today. We want to have the chance to consider all that those who've responded have had to say before setting out the detailed model. And you may know we've had 14 events in 5 cities with over 800 stakeholders, and have also received over 500 written responses. And it was right that we consulted in order to get a range of views, and we've been very clear that we don't have all the answers yet. Indeed, that was why we haven't come in and presented a fait accompli. But there should be no doubt that the broad thrust of the proposals, the competition of a significant proportion of offender services with a retained public sector service, the rollout of payment by results, a through-the-gate service, the extension of support to under 12-month sentenced prisoners, that these things will be implemented. We will continue to work with partners to iron out the design challenges, such as ensuring the continuation of effective local partnerships and the relationship between providers and the public sector service to enable that to be the case. As you know, we plan to open up the delivery of rehabilitative services to a wide range of new providers in the private and voluntary sectors. These providers will be paid by results to drive down reoffending. And this isn't an ideologically driven approach. This is a pragmatic focus on harnessing the best of all sectors and the unique contributions they can make. We know that the tight financial environment means that government spending will need to continue to fall. But there is a cohort of offenders that we do not reach at the moment, and it is absolutely crucial that we do reach because of their particularly high reoffending rates. The way that we can see to afford that is to complete the provision for low and medium risk offenders, reducing costs in this area, and to pay by results in reducing reoffending. PBR as a concept is a fundamentally sensible approach. Providers will only be paid in full if they reduce reoffending. And there can be no better way to focus minds on the best ways to stop offenders from committing more crimes. And we expect that to include some of the good practice that we see now. I want to be very clear that we will not compromise on public safety. I know that concerns have been raised about the segmentation of offender management by risk level, and indeed one option in response to that would be to compete out the management of all offenders. But our proposals do not currently do that, because we believe that a professional public sector service is best placed to manage those who present highest risk of serious harm, just as we believe they are best placed to make judgments about who falls into which risk category, both at the outset and on an ongoing basis. And indeed, we think that there will be significant benefits for the public sector probation service in focusing their role on using their expertise and judgment on managing the most dangerous offenders and holding responsibility for risk. To facilitate that, it's our intention to provide the public sector with much more flexibility and freedom from central control, allowing probation professionals to spend their time according to their judgment rather than in response to central diktat. We also want to explore ways of ensuring that professional standards are maintained, for example, through a professional institute. We are clear that not just anyone will be able to provide services for offenders. We'll require any provider of rehabilitative services to demonstrate that they have the capability to effectively manage risk. This means that they will need to employ staff with the required training and experience to carry out risk assessment and management, and indeed in the first instance, the majority of this staff will be those currently working for probation trusts. We also intend that common standards will apply to all providers in relation to public protection, and there will be inspection arrangements as now. And we know that the relationship between the public sector and providers will be crucial. As now, communication and information sharing will be key, and we're considering ways to cement that further in both formal and collaborative ways. Turning to the providers of rehabilitative services, I want to offer some observations on market building and evidence based on our thinking and what we've heard during the consultation period. We know that the Ministry of Justice have a role to play in market stewardship, and we want to make sure we get that right. I want to make very clear that we want a market where not just the largest private companies can take part. The fundamental rationale behind opening up provision is to bring in innovative, specialised, and where required, locally grounded approaches, as well as, of course, a business-like focus on efficiency and outcomes. We believe that a varied and transparent supply chain is the best way to do so. That's why we're particularly keen to see partnerships between voluntary and community sector organisations or private and VCS providers coming forward to compete for contracts. We will see what bids come in, but we want to go beyond binary prime and sub relationships. However, smaller VCS organisations will not be excluded either. We want to put in place arrangements so that, if they want to, they can work as subcontractors to larger providers, ensuring disproportionate levels of financial risk are not passed down. We want to see VCS organisations, large and small, playing their part, and will require providers bidding for contracts to demonstrate how they will create strong local partnerships. And we believe that transparency is crucial here. VCS organisations and the private sector have spoken of how we must manage the transfer of risk down the supply chain and the corresponding reward so as to have a diverse supply chain. They've also commented on the importance of ensuring that offender referrals down the supply chain remain constant and fair through the life of the contract, and we will continue to work with the market to address this. Potential providers have also raised the standards and governance framework that would be put in place. Many have suggested something that takes learning from the Merlin standard should be developed for use in this programme, and so we will consider the best way to do so. But allowing providers adequate protection is not just about rules and regulations, it's also about the design of the system and the contracts. That's why we're keen to consult, we were keen to consult, and that it is why we hope that as many of you as possible contributed to that process. This is not about interfering with the services providers offer or being overly prescriptive. We want as much flexibility as possible beyond delivering licence conditions or the orders of the court for providers to do what works. But we also want a fair and sustainable market and a transparent supply chain for the benefit of all involved. As you may know, in order to support the VCS, we've issued the first £150,000 of a £500,000 pot designed to build capacity within VCS organisations to compete for PBR contracts. This will be used to develop an action plan setting out what VCS organisations need to do to overcome the barriers preventing them from competing in the PBR marketplace. The recommendations will address the problems of a wide range of providers, from large national organisations who could compete as primes to small local organisations. The Cabinet Office are also considering how best to play a role in bolstering the commercial acumen and acuity of the VCS, and we will continue to work closely with them in that endeavour. We believe that the emerging social investment market has the potential to ensure that VCS bidders can put together credible bids and form genuine partnerships with the private sector. We've been talking to those involved in the social investment market as part of the consultation, and we'll be interested to see the formal responses on this. It's also open for leaders in probation to put together proposals for suitable alternative delivery vehicles and mutuals and partnerships to compete in the new landscape. Of course, these vehicles will need to be entities capable of bearing the financial and operational risks associated with offender services in the community and the introduction of payment by results. And I'm very pleased that colleagues in the Cabinet Office are offering access to a package of support to those interested in this opportunity. Through the Mutual Support Programme, and indeed the Mutual Support Fund will help prospective vehicles in developing the commercial skills and business plans to explore this option. We want to work with organisations that can demonstrate success, but we know that it's often the smallest organisations that, whilst achieving this in practice, can struggle to evidence their achievements. And that's why in April the MOJ will be launching a Justice Data Lab to provide organisations with easy access to high quality reoffending data specific to the group of offenders they've been working with. This will allow providers to focus on interventions that work in reducing reoffending and to better demonstrate their effectiveness and to ultimately cut crime in their area. While the service will be open to providers from all sectors, the main demand and focus for the Data Lab is expected to come from organisations working in the voluntary and charitable sector. So I want to finish by reaffirming our commitment to these radical reforms. We will listen and we will make changes to the design of the system as a result. But we cannot miss this opportunity to finally get a grip on the consistently high reoffending rates. and to work with all offenders who leave prison. A diverse and transparent market is one of the main ways to ensure that we do so. These are the most significant reforms to tackling reoffending and managing offenders in the community in recent memory, and we are committed to seeing them through. Thank you very much. Very happy to take some questions. Mark, if you want to, do you want me to do them, or do you want to do them?
I'll do them.
You
Thank
do
you very
them.
much.
Right.
And,
Jolly good.
Would you like to come and sit here, Jeremy?
Right,
We'll
I'll
do
come
it
back.
on the panel. Thanks. Yeah, the Minister needs to go at 11, so we have half an hour. Before we do that, I'm going to introduce the rest of the panel just in case they want to pick up on anything that you say or comes out during the Q&A. To my immediate left is James Kelly, who's the Director of Strategy and New Business at Injus and has a big interest in trying to get some of the contracts that we're going on this stuff. To his far left is Max Chambers, Head of Crime and Justice at Policy Exchange, whose paper Expanding Payment by Results, Strategic Choices and Recommendations is, frankly, essential reading for anyone interested in this stuff. And immediately to my right is Lucy Bowe, who is from NOMS, where she plays a key role in the rehabilitation programme. So, Jeremy, we'll take some questions to the floor in one sec. I've got one question from me first, which is really just, I wondered if you could tell me what the overarching purpose of all this is, because there's a whole series of potential things. It could be about reducing reoffending, or saving money, or reducing the prison population, or cutting crime, or indeed improving the life chances of ex-offenders. In designing the contract, you've got to decide which one of those it is. You can't just say all of the above. So which one is it?
Well, reducing reoffending is at the core of this, and the way in which we want to structure the contract is to reward those people who succeed in that regard. That's what's fundamental about this. And it seems to me that reducing reoffending has a whole range of further benefits. So almost all of the things you've just mentioned there, Mark, will be affected positively by a reduction in reoffending. And that's what we need to target our reforms on. And that's why we're attracted to payment by results, because it's a straightforward mechanism of saying, well, I say that, of course it's not a straightforward mechanism, but it's a straightforward idea of saying to someone, if you succeed in bringing down the reoffending rates, and in some cases, of course, of those offenders who have reoffended often and over a long period of time, then we will reward you for that, because the benefits to society, the benefits to potential victims, and of course the benefits to the taxpayer are considerable if you succeed in that way. So that's what's at the heart of this. Now, nobody's pretending it's easy to design a system that will avoid all of the perverse incentives that could be in a payment by results system. But we do believe it's possible to do it, and for the reasons I've set out, we think it's worth trying.
And just one other quick question, which was, you used the phrase in talking about contracting out all but the most high-risk offenders, you used the phrase, we do not currently do that. And I wondered, the word currently, does that mean that in the back of your mind there's the thought that one day you might take it all away?
Well, I think if we are to have a proper consultation on these things, we need to listen to what people have to say. But the government is not minded to put out to competition the management of high-risk offenders. And I need to clarify that, because when people talk about high-risk offenders, they may mean different things. I'm talking about high risk of serious harm. For those offenders, we believe that the Public Sector Probation Service should retain direct management of those offenders. That's the proposal as it stands. We want to listen very carefully to what people have to say about it, but that's what we're minded to do. And in relation to every other offender, it's also important to recognise that we are still saying that for the Public Sector Probation Service, they will retain an overarching responsibility for risk of serious harm for those offenders too. Now, there are all sorts of subsidiary questions that then follow about how, as a probation officer, you carry out that responsibility and how you have the information, for example, that you need in order to do that properly. And that's absolutely at the heart of what we've been talking about throughout this consultation period. But we believe that that is a sensible place to draw the dividing line. We recognise also, and I hope those of you who've been engaged in this consultation process from the beginning will recognise this, we've also accepted from the start that there is an issue over the dynamic nature of risk, and that people who are allocated the designation of high risk at the start don't necessarily stay there, just as those who are allocated the designation low or medium risk don't necessarily stay there. So the system needs to be capable of dealing with changes in risk profile, and we want to design a system that will manage that.
Okay, let's take some questions from the floor. We'll take a couple at a time. Yeah, Julian there, and then lady here.
Thank you very much indeed, Julian O'Halloran, BBC Current Affairs. I speak as a total non-specialist in this area, but after a couple of brushes with sex offender treatment, not in my own case, I may say, on either side of the Atlantic in years gone by, I have come to the view that, the knowledge of whether therapies work has proceeded with almost glacial slowness. And even when a result does come up, such as, sex offender treatment program may reduce reoffending by 14% or something like that, there is not agreement about it. And you see papers being presented saying, there's no real evidence that this is working. So how on earth are you going to be able to determine that payment by results, even within a few years of a contractor being taken on? Surely it's going to take 10 years or so. It's going to be extremely difficult to work out a fair way of doing this.
Okay, we'll take a couple of questions and then yes, there you go.
Debbie Ryan, Director of Rehabilitation, G4S. I'd like the Minister to expand, please, on what was inferred to in the consultation document, which is about the resettlement activity which will take place within prisons. We've had lots of opportunity to enter into dialogue and talk to probation colleagues and probation representatives, but haven't currently had the same opportunity with prison governors and those who might be involved in that process. So to understand that a bit more would be good.
Okay, do you want to deal first of all with this question of how are you going to measure success?
Yeah, I think without being able to sort of talk about the exact design of the system, it's difficult to answer specifically. But in general terms, what we'd be looking to do, of course, is agree a period of time over which you measure this. So over what period of time does a provider have to keep someone out of trouble? Then, of course, you've got to work out what you mean by out of trouble. Do you mean not offending at all for that period? Do you mean offending less than they previously offended? All of these things we have to work through and come up with an answer on.
So you still don't know whether it's a binary answer?
Well, there are lots of arguments in both directions, aren't there?
When does this come in?
Well, we've just finished a consultation on the 22nd of February. Here we are on the 4th, is it the 4th of March today?
Yeah.
We have 580 written responses. Now, if I came to you and said, right, I've read them all, I know what they all say, here are the answers, you'd be noticeably sceptical. I think I'd understand why.
When are you introducing these contracts?
You'll need to give us a moment or two to work out exactly what people have said to us on what we accept are complex issues. What I can say to you is that we will work through those and we will find a way of resolving those issues. But coming back to Julian's question, which is really about how you measure success and how you know what works and how you know what doesn't work, well, in the end, the beauty of this system is that so long as you get your measurement schemes right, and I've said I don't underestimate the difficulty of doing that, so long as you do that, in the end, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If at the end of the day, you've taken the measures you thought as a provider were most likely to reduce reoffending, you've done those things, and then you get a set of results, if you've succeeded, and if the outcomes have been what you hoped they would be, then you will be rewarded for it in financial terms, and if they haven't, you won't. What we've had up to this point is a system which rewards you for the process, but not for the outcome. And that's what we want to change. So that's the benefit of payment by results, and that's really what's at the root of it. Now, Debbie's point, which is about resettlement in prisons, I think is crucial, and there's a real danger, and I've probably been guilty of it this morning too, that when we talk about rehabilitation, we always talk about it in the context of what goes on in the community. And it's very important that we don't just talk about that. You're sitting next to the Governor of Leeds Prison, who does some fantastic work, frankly, which I saw a couple of weeks ago, in terms of resettlement and rehabilitation whilst people are serving the custodial part of their sentence. And it's very important we don't forget about that. It's just as important to make sure that as people within prisons like Leeds reach out into the community to facilitate rehabilitation, and at the same time we institute a system where people are going to reach back into custody from the community under the transforming rehabilitation agenda, we'd like to make sure that the hands meet in the middle. And so there is a challenge there, an organisational challenge, to make sure that what is being done from the beginning of someone's custodial sentence through the gate and beyond that into the community is coordinated and effective. But I don't believe it's beyond the wit of man to do that, and we're very conscious of the need to make sure, just as you say, that resettlement work inside prisons is not overlooked and is not minimised in the context of this debate. So I take the point absolutely, and I hope what you'll see as the system develops is that we do recognise exactly that point.
All right. Take a couple more questions, please. Yes, lady there, gentleman here.
Hi, Fiona Cuthbertson from Keystone Consulting. I was just wondering, one of the important issues is transparency for smaller businesses. How are you going to make sure that those smaller businesses do actually know the terms of references and when the contracts come out? And also, could there be any opportunities for different timeframes for bigger and smaller companies? Because a smaller company is going to need to maintain its cash flow much more quickly than a bigger company. Otherwise, they're just not going to be able to get involved.
Interesting question. Yep, gentleman here.
So, firstly, to welcome Jeremy's statement that reducing reoffending
Can you
is
just identify
is at the core.
yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm Jonathan Flory from Social Finance. To welcome, Jeremy, your statement that reducing reoffending is at the core. When you come to design the structure and thinking about those payments by results, we would urge certainly that rather than those profits or revenues being kind of nice to have for contractors, they would be a necessary part of making the contract work, so that there is a real incentive to put substantial resource into that very important part.
Okay. All right. Fiona's question, sort of differential contracts to recognise the differences between small VCS or private small companies and larger ones.
Yes, I mean, I think this is one of the significant design challenges here, to make sure that small companies do feel as though they can participate in this market. And as you heard me say, we're keen not to just have the traditional classification of a prime contractor and a subcontractor. So there are a number of different iterations of that we can hopefully see come forward, and social capital play its part. But your questions, I think, are really about the management of the process once someone is involved in a bid. In whatever capacity they are involved in it as a smaller organisation, how do we make sure that's sustainable over the longer term? I think transparency is at the key to this. We want to make sure, I think, two things. First of all, that when someone comes forward with a bid involving probably, we hope, a number of organisations, we'll want to be able to assess that bid, not just on quality and price, but also on the sustainability of the arrangements they're putting to us. So if they're coming to us and saying, look, we've got a variety of smaller organisations, probably in the voluntary and community sector, each of whom have something specific to offer the package deal that we're presenting, then what we want to say back is, well, that's great, but that's not just going to be important on day one of your contract, it's going to be important throughout your contract. So how do you persuade us, as a bidder, that you're going to sustain that process throughout the operation of your contract? And we'll want to keep looking at them as they do that, to ensure that that process is continuing and that they are continuing to be fair to those smaller organisations within their organisation as a whole. So we will want to do that, and that's about transparency. It's about contract management as well as about bid assessment. So far as cash flow is concerned, I think it's important to recognise that there are a number of different ways in which a larger organisation encompassing smaller organisations in its bid might choose to do this. It might choose to say, well, look, the organisations we want to bring in are simply not capable of bearing significant financial risk, so we will pay them directly for what they do. Or we might have a situation where the smaller organisation will say to the bigger organisation, well, actually, I can bear some of the risk myself. And what we're discovering through this consultation process is that the voluntary and community sector has a variety of different opinions as to what sort of risk-bearing mechanisms should be made available to them.
So there will be the flexibility then for the bigger organisations to the big partner to actually make sure that we're small.
Well, we're certainly not going to say to a larger organisation, you have got to transfer risk down the supply chain all the way to the bottom. We're not going to say that to them. We'll be as unprescriptive as we can in terms of the offers which are brought to us in the forms of bidding. But what I am saying is that we are not simply going to glance at the bid, work out what its price implications and its quality implications are, and stop there. We're also going to have a look at its sustainability in terms of the management of the supply chain, and of course in terms of its ability to sustain important local partnerships, which many people have talked about in the course of this process. And we want to make sure that that's something we look at not just at the assessment of bid stage, but also on an ongoing basis.
Jonathan?
Well, I think point's well made. I take your point. I don't think I need to to disagree with you. I think it's something I fully understand.
Okay, all right, a couple more questions, please. Gentleman here and lady at the back.
Hi there. Very impressive speech and very pleased that you're working this way. My name is Rory Worthington. I'm experienced in probation. I'm currently a systemic psychotherapist.
Sorry, introduce yourself if you would.
Rory Worthington. And I suppose there are three over sort of connecting issues I'm wanting to raise. One is that having worked with some very, very high risk of serious offending people, I just know the nature of change is really quite complicated. Yeah. And that the idea that this is a sort of a neutral budgeted affair is problematic, and in terms that often many of the issues are around about accommodation and practical arrangements. So I'm just wondering about the budget resources for other needs which may be highlighted, and then it leads on to the other thoughts around about. We know that about 40% of the prison population, so certainly with female prisons, huge amount of mental health problems. We know that the King's Fund has come against PBR as a means of dealing with mental health, so I'm trying to sort of find what the link is between those two. And then lastly, perhaps a slightly different kind of question, which is around about, are there any contingency arrangements if this isn't perhaps quite successful as intended?
Okay, three questions there. We'll take the one from the lady at the back as well.
Hi. Jocelyn Hillman from Working Chance.
Yeah.
So following on from one of the points the gentleman made is everybody realises now that women offenders have different needs. What is the Minister doing to ensure that women offenders are not being overlooked in these contracts?
Yes.
Should we run through the high-risk offenders, the nature of change? I mean, this is obviously one of the big criticisms or big questions behind all of this.
Yeah, I think it is important, and I think, as I say, it's about partly how you manage that transition from someone being a low or medium risk offender to being a high risk offender. And I think one of the things you said strikes a particular chord with me, which is that even with someone who we would designate, and it'll be a public sector probation officer, of course, doing the designation, let's be clear about that from the outset, and that's both at the point at which the court deals with an offender and in terms of any reclassification. That job will be done by a public sector probation officer, not by a provider. But when we come to talk about the changes in an offender that makes them move from a designation of risk, which is medium to low risk, to a higher risk designation, it seems to me one of the interesting questions that's been asked here in the course of this consultation is, well, does that mean, if you're saying that someone who becomes a high-risk offender moves into the direct management of the public sector probation service, does that mean that everything for that offender then changes? Because there is obviously an argument for high-risk offenders, just for many others, that continuity is important, and that if you've started with a series of interventions, you want to continue with those interventions. So it seems to me that what we will possibly want to allow for is for someone who is a public sector probation officer, given information that makes them think that someone must be redesignated from a medium to low risk offender to being a high risk offender, once they've made that designation and that change, they may still want that individual to carry on having a series of interventions that they're currently having. They may want to add something on top, or they may want to stop all of that and do something completely different. But I think the choice has to be that of the public sector probation officer, and they should be able, it seems to me, but we'll obviously work through all of these answers, we will want, I think, to leave the option open of the public sector probation officer allowing for some at least of what's already happening to continue to happen. And you're right also that for offenders of all kinds, you can't simply look at the criminogenic needs. You've also got to look at accommodation, you've got to look at family circumstances, you've got to look at addictions of various kinds, and you've got to frankly look at employment too. We all know that getting someone a stable place to live, a job, and a stable family environment is going to be the best method you can think of reducing their likelihood of reoffending. So all of those things will be relevant to all offenders, and again, we will expect all of the different sectors of this to work well together, and I have no reason to think that they won't. But in terms of high-risk offenders, it seems to me we should leave a number of options available to public sector probation officers.
And specifically on the mental health point.
Yeah, on mental health, I think you're, again, absolutely right. The prevalence of this is huge. Frankly, if you'll allow me a slight diversion, which is exactly the right word, I think we should also be looking much more carefully than we are at ensuring that people with significant mental illnesses don't end up in the criminal justice system in the first place. What we're dealing with here is those who've found their way to the end of the criminal justice system. It seems to me we ought to be much better than we are at diverting them away from the criminal justice system in the first place. But equally, if it is true that a significant number of offenders who have reached the end of the process and do find themselves on the books of a provider of any kind have a significant number of mental illnesses, and I think that is true, and if it is also true that in order to get them away from reoffending, something has to be done to address those mental health problems, then it seems to me a payment by results method points you in the direction, as a provider, of wanting to do something about that and to liaise with mental health services in your area to make sure that that happens.
But do you think, I mean, the idea of using payment by results in the health context, in a mental health context, that's sort of going to, it's going to be seepage here, isn't there? And clearly there are people within the health sector who'd be very concerned about the idea that, you know, mental health treatment should be used on the basis of how much money you get out.
Well, I think we need to separate two things. I'm not talking about mental health treatment being available on a payment by results basis. What I am talking about is for those who are tasked with the job of getting someone's reoffending down, and that's what this system will task them with doing and reward them for doing if they do well. For those people, if mental health is a significant contributing factor to someone's likelihood of reoffending, I would expect the provider in that case to do everything they can to link with other agencies to make sure that that need is addressed, just as I would expect them to look at the housing needs of that individual, the educational training needs of that individual. All of those things will form part of the approach which we know will be most successful at bringing that person's risk of reoffending down. And the system we're designing here will push everybody in the direction of doing those things that work. So whereas I take the point, I think it's important to recognise what we are and are not talking about within PBR here. I also think it's important not to forget about other things we need to do in liaison and diversion away from the criminal justice system in the first place. Contingency was your last point. We obviously need to make sure that if there is a significant failure of an entire organisation providing services to offenders, that there is another organisation that can step in and take over. We'll have a close look at that. We haven't omitted that point in consideration, and you'll see exactly what we're going to do about that when we bring forward the final proposals. But we absolutely have taken that point on board. As far as women offenders, I can't see where the lady is who was asking. Thank you. Yes, absolutely, you're right. And I think one of the things that the Secretary of State did when first arriving in office in September was to recognise immediately that we needed to do two things, really. First of all, we needed to make sure that the transforming rehabilitation agenda included specific consideration of the needs of female offenders. But secondly, much more broadly than that, he thought, and I think he's absolutely right, because he's always absolutely right, to separate out responsibility within the ministerial team for female offenders from male offenders. So my colleague Helen Grant has specific responsibility for female offenders throughout the criminal justice system. And as you will know, what we're doing is drawing together a number of proposals around the custodial estate, and we're going to have a look at how we might provide for the custodial estate more effectively for female offenders, but equally to look at the specific needs of female offenders within the community. And we're going to do all of those things, and I hope you'll see that when these proposals come forward and start to be fleshed out, you'll see that we've taken that point very well on board. And we will expect providers who take up one of these contracts to ensure that they've persuaded us that they are making appropriate provision, not just for female offenders, but for a number of different classes of offenders who have particular needs.
Can I just, on the contingency point, so I'm slightly puzzled as to quite where we are with this. So if somebody goes belly up, what happens?
There'll be more than one organisation involved in the delivery of payment by results throughout the country. And so one way of doing it, not saying that this is the way we will necessarily settle on, one way of doing it would be to say to another organisation providing PBR rehabilitative services elsewhere in the country, look, you need to have in the back of your mind that we might come to you one day and say we're going to transfer this contract to you as well. So it is possible to see a way in which other organisations delivering similar contracts in other parts of the country might be able to step in to deal with it. Exactly the same way, of course, as would happen in various other parts of the public policy agenda. That's not inconceivable and it's not unheard of.
Okay, more questions, please. Gentleman here and gentleman there. Yeah, gentleman in the middle and the front here, if you would.
Mr. Aiken.
Jonathan Aitken, ex-offender, trustee of NACRO and others. Thank you for the very clear declaration of political will and intent which lies behind transforming rehabilitation. But the devil's going to be in the detail, and an awful lot more political will is going to be needed in certain key areas. Can I suggest just two of them of concern? You're going to need a lot of trained voluntary mentors.
Yep.
How many trained voluntary mentors exist in the criminal justice system right now? How many do you think you're going to need? And how are you going to get them, or insist that the contractors get them? And secondly, allied to that, do you agree, you didn't mention them in your speech, but I expect you might agree, that ex-offenders have quite a good part to play? But again, how are you going to give the political impetus to a whole lot of companies, including those sponsoring today, who actually, on the whole, do not give any opportunities for ex-offenders?
Interesting point. We'll take that. Just gentleman here.
Russell Webster, ex-probation officer and host of a PBR blog. Can I ask the Minister to talk a bit more about how the commercial interaction will impact on the multi-agency issue? I think probation trusts would regard substance misuse, mental health, etc. as criminogenic needs, and have done quite a good job at punching above their weight in terms of getting other local agencies to provide those services. What we begin to hear from the work programme is that when someone, for instance, with a long-term drug problem gets drug treatment and is referred by a provider, well, the local authority has paid £5,000–6,000 for residential drug treatment, and then when it realises the provider is going to get financial remuneration for the person being much more job ready, and most of that work's been done by the provider, they then start saying, well, where's our cut of that? So just how you will unpick that, because clearly we have a lot of cooperation at the moment and we wouldn't want to be undoing that.
Okay. Yeah. Trained mentors, how many are there and how many do you need?
Well, Mr. Aitken will understand a political answer when he hears one. So the answer is we don't have enough and we're going to need a lot more. But I think that the second part of your question is a hint to where we find them, because I think that re-offending is obviously the key challenge, and nobody knows about reoffending better than those who have offended themselves. So I think what I would say is this: when I go around prisons, what I quite often come across is peer mentoring going on inside prison. And it seems to me that quite often works extremely effectively. It's a way of newer, quite often very young prisoners quickly getting to grips with the prison regime, and older, more established offenders starting to take a little more responsibility, which is no bad thing for when they end up leaving custody themselves. I also think that there must surely be potential for us to say to those offenders who are using a large part of their time whilst in custody to mentor others, to be toe-by-toe reading coaches, to do a number of other things, and there are a number of schemes of which you'll be aware throughout the prison system where mentoring and the like is going on, to say to those offenders, look, wouldn't you like to consider making this as a career, so that when you come out, you will have the opportunity not just to do mentoring, but to be paid for it, so that you've got an opportunity to build a life for yourself outside the prison walls by helping other people do exactly the same. I think that's likely to be quite attractive to a large number of former offenders. And what we're doing with these proposals is creating a huge new market for mentoring. Now, you're right, I didn't mention mentoring in my speech, and you'll also be aware that there's a political risk in all of these things, that if you keep saying things over and over and over and over again, eventually you get bored with saying them and you forget to say them again. So you shouldn't take any omission of the word mentoring from what I said to indicate any lack of enthusiasm for it, quite the reverse. We think that this is likely to be at the heart of what providers offer in bringing rates of reoffending down. I think we also have to be careful not to be too prescriptive. I don't think it's right for me to say to every potential bidder and provider, you must have X numbers of mentors, you must make sure that the ratio of mentor to mentee is the following. I don't want to be that prescriptive. But what I think most providers whose bids we'll want to consider will come to the conclusion of on their own is that mentoring is a very good way of acting as the glue for all the other things that they will need to do with offenders to make sure they turn away from reoffending. So I think there'll be a huge market for mentoring. And I think we will find quite a lot of those mentors that we need from among current and past prisoners who've had some experience of doing it whilst inside themselves.
Jonathan said voluntary mentors, but you're talking about paid mentors. I mean,
well, I think
what do you think it should be?
There could be a combination, but I think if you're looking as a provider to provide for rehabilitation and you're going to get paid on the outcomes you achieve, then inevitably you're going to need to retain staff. You'll need to decide how you deploy your resources in the best way to get the outcomes you want to gain. So it'll be up to the provider to decide how they do that. And again, I'm not going to be prescriptive.
But it does come back to the point made by Russell in his question, which is that those people who are providing services further down the track, whether it be a local authority, whether it be mental health services, whether it be a voluntary mentor as a sort of individual, they are. Some of them are going to say, well, why should Inchus be making a lot of money on the back of this, and I'm just doing it out of my duty?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need. I mean, that's a fair point, and let's move on to that, because I think that there are going to be inevitably requirements for people in existing partnership arrangements to work with these providers just as they work with the probation service. I don't buy the argument, and never have, that simply installing a new individual into that partnership makes the whole partnership structure fall to pieces and suddenly makes people who've been working very hard to reduce crime rates, to reduce reoffending, suddenly say, well, if it's somebody from this panel or if it's somebody from Serco, I'm not doing it anymore. I don't believe that's what will happen. I understand the concern, and I understand that any change will cause concern to those already in the system. But actually, I think that the motivation for those who are in the police force, those who work within the health service, those who work in local government, in this context, will remain the same, which is to reduce reoffending. Everybody benefits if that's what you do. If you're the police, you benefit because you're dealing with fewer criminals, fewer offences. If you're a local government, you benefit. If you're in the health service, you benefit. You'll continue to benefit from a reduction in reoffending. All that we're doing is focusing one particular part of that equation much more closely on the reduction of reoffending. So there will still be a focus on the reduction of reoffending within those partnership arrangements, just where it ought to be. And I think people will behave in a sensible, mature, professional way, and I think they'll get on with the job, working with their new partner, who of course in many cases may be very similar to their old partner in terms of the personnel they're dealing with. So I don't believe
they're looking to make money out of it. That's going to be the difference. There's going to be a feeling among the public sector or voluntary sector that they're doing it with very different motivations from somebody who comes from...
But that's where I disagree, you see, because it seems to me the motivation is exactly the same. There is an intervening stage between what you're describing and the making of the money. And the intervening stage is a reduction in reoffending. That's how you make the money. If you don't reduce reoffending, you don't make the money. So your motivation will still be to reduce reoffending, it seems to me, and that's exactly the same motivation that you'll find with your other partners when you get into those arrangements.
I know you do have to disappear at 11 o'clock. That looks like 11 o'clock to me.
Right.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to show appreciation to the Minister.
Thank you.